Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And the more I look at this, Michelle Obama, what's her name? Donald Trump's wife? Can anyone? Mrs. Trump. Yeah, the more I look at this Michelle Obama, Mrs. Trump plagiarism row, the more baffled I become at what on earth they thought they were playing at. It's stone cold stealing. Absolutely brass neck theft. And we may later in the programme have a little brief discussion about what your theory is on how the heck this happened.
Donald Trump's wife, Melania, took centre stage on the first day of the Republican convention, but she's become embroiled in a scandal after being accused of lifting part of a speech from Michelle Obama's address to the Democratic convention 8 years ago.
My parents impressed on me the values that you work hard for what you want in life.
Barack and I were raised with so many of the same values, like you work hard for what you want in life.
That your word is your bond, and you do what you say and keep your promise. That you treat people with respect.
That your word is your bond, that you do what you say you're going to do. That you treat people with dignity and respect.
Because we want our children in this nation to know that the only limit to your achievements is the strength of your dreams and your willingness to work for them.
Because we want our children and all children in this nation to know that the only limit to the height of your achievements is the reach of your dreams and your willingness to work hard for them.
Well, our correspondent Hannah Thomas-Peters is live in downtown Cleveland, where the Republican convention is taking place. Good to talk to you again, Hannah. Do you get the sense that somebody in Trump's team is going to get their wrists slapped?
It's not clear at the moment. I'll just explain to you where I am right now. I'm in the shadows of the Q Convention Arena. There's a protest going on right behind me in relation to the police killings of young black men, which is why you can probably see lots of cameras and some police around as well trying to marshal the protest. But of course, the big thing that everybody's really focused on is the Melania speech and the apparent plagiarism of the Michelle Obama speech 8 years ago. We'll just move out of the way here. We've got a group of police outriders coming past. So that's the focus, despite all the activity here. I'm going to give you a look at the kind of security that we're dealing with. Big busloads of state troopers there. Probably just being bused to an extra security point that's being set up. There's lots of protests underway, planned and unplanned. But as I said, the big issue that everybody is talking about is the Melania speech. Paul Manafort, Donald Trump's campaign chair, said very specifically that he didn't have a problem with it, that there was no issue. He robustly denied that there was plagiarism. He said that Michelle Obama didn't have a monopoly on those words and thoughts. But the Democrats, of course, feel differently. And earlier I spoke to President Barack Obama's chief campaign strategist, David Axelrod. This is what he had to say.
Well, I think they've got a few kinks there. I mean, that, you know, honestly, Mark McKinnon's a master here. He's run some great campaigns. This is sort of unthinkable at this level that something like that would happen. I think there were other things in last night that reflect, you know, Donald Trump has gotten very far in an improvisational campaign. But at some point you actually do need some level of organization, some level of discipline. And what we saw last night was a breakdown of that, and I think Melania was the victim of it.
The other point that David Axelrod made was that this issue may not hurt Donald Trump with his base, because the base kind of likes the chaos and the off-the-cuff nature of the campaign, but it could, the Democrats hope, hurt him at a general election, which is why they'll do their very best to keep this at the very top of the news agenda in the coming 24 hours.
Hannah, thank you. Hannah Thomas-Peters in Cleveland, Ohio.
We will return, I think, given the heated nature of the last exchange you heard on Mr. Ferrari's show, to the question of the poor getting richer, but the squeezed middle class falling behind. That's a category of society who are feeling struggling to get by, but embarrassed to say so. Because from the outside, everybody else will presume that they're winning. I'm also drawn today to a story about a cafeteria owner who has offered to tell off other people's children. Now, I don't think we'll focus too specifically on the cafe, but the notion of telling off other people's children. How many times have I said to you, how many times have I prefaced something that I've said to you over the last couple of years by saying, well, obviously, I wouldn't have said I'm 44 2 years ago. I'd have said I'm 42. But I mentioned my age and wonder how the world could have changed so much in such a relatively short period of time. When we were kids, absolutely standard to get told off by your mate's mum. I got my bum smacked a couple of times by one of my mate's mums. Absolutely standard to be told off by other people's parents, other adults. Now, it's a minefield. It really is. It's a minefield that I think I can understand both as a victim of and as a perpetrator of as well. So we'll get onto that, I think, after 12. I'm going to introduce you to some gentlemen who've made, I don't know quite how to describe it, a satirical account of the Brexit vote that's going out on the BBC tonight. The rules of the BBC are such, and this will come as a surprise to you, that even though they've made a satirical comedy about the referendum, they're not allowed to express any opinion at all about it, even now, after the referendum, in a studio promoting a comedy made about the referendum. That is the impartiality rules of the BBC that I sometimes wonder we misunderstand over in commercial radio, because everyone's convinced everybody's biased who doesn't agree with them. That is the definition, if you like, of impartiality, and thank the Lord we don't have to practice it here. Because we begin this morning with a question that I don't know whether I'm going to highlight my ignorance or whether it is actually something that we're being a little bit misled about. I always worry slightly when you find yourself coining phrases that could, in a different context, be used in quite an ugly way. But there is a case for protecting British assets that I find really compelling. There's a technology company, I'm sure you're across this story. There's a technology company that is being sold to the Japanese, ARM. They make so many microchips. It's quite incredible. They make so many microchips. They sold more microchips in America last year alone than Intel, the one that we've all heard of, have ever sold in their entire existence. I'll just run that by you again, because that's absolutely staggering. I hope I've remembered it correctly. I do all this off the top of my head, you know. One day I'm going to become a massive cropper. They sell more microchips, or they sold more microchips in America last year alone than Intel, the sort of household name for microprocessors, have sold during their entire existence. It's a company called ARM. It was founded in 1990 and it employs more than 3,000 people. It's a technology firm, and it's to be bought by a Japanese bank, the rather winningly named SoftBank, for about £24 billion. The owner, or rather the man who founded it, has described this as terrible news. He's described it as a real shock to the system, to the nation as well. And Herman Hauser is his name. This is a sad day for me and a sad day for technology in Britain. Now, pay attention, because I know you might be thinking this has got nothing to do with you. If you've got your country's interests at heart, it's got everything to do with you. So the man who founded it, ARM, is the last British technology company that has a global reach, he said. It gave Britain real strength. It was a British company that determined the next generation microprocessor architecture, arguably the most precious jewel in the crown of British technology. These are the things that we have to be good at moving forward in the so-called global market, because we can't compete with sweatshops. We can't open great warehouses and factories with people on £2 an hour making garments that sell on the British high streets, because thankfully we are more civilized, we're more advanced. So where do we make our money? At the moment we're a service economy, aren't we? People keep saying that we're a service economy, you're a service economy. I'm not quite sure what they mean. Well, what they mean is that what we pay for, what we are paid for most in this country, is intellectual exercise. It's advice. It's something intangible. It's not like you buy a box full of widgets. You'll buy a financial product that might maximize your investments. We're a service economy. Slightly scary when you think about the future and where we're heading. But that's what we are. This is one of the rare examples of where the country should be moving, surely, where it should be moving. Doing stuff that is built upon education, it's built upon academic achievement, it's built upon entrepreneurial flair, and it's built very much upon modernity. And I'm going to trust the experts on this until you tell me otherwise. It really is the last massive British company that is reaching out around the world, and it won't be British anymore. Tell me why you don't mind. 0345 606 0973. I hope I don't have to lay out any of my credentials to prove that I endeavour to live a life that is utterly devoid of anything that could be remotely described as jingoism or xenophobia. I think friends and foes alike would agree that I'm very rarely vulnerable to either of those accusations. But on this one, I really feel that Britishness is important. The first political story I ever really got my teeth into as a kid when I was doing my A-level in politics was Westland. And again, phone lines are open. They're already ringing, so be quick. You know where we're going. You know roughly what the question will be. Book your place now. To me, and this might be the first thing you need to correct me on, to me, Westland and this story seem more or less identical, except we haven't got a Michael Heseltine in the case. We don't seem to have a Michael Heseltine. Michael Heseltine was adamant when the British helicopter company Westland went up for sale that the government should intervene to ensure that it goes to a British buyer, or that it stayed within British hands. And Leon Britton, the then Trade Secretary, was supportive of the bid being made by the American company Sikorsky, which would have seen, I think, the last major manufacturer of helicopters in Britain move into American hands. And this was, I'm so sorry if you know all this already, but I'm working on the presumption that not everybody will. This was the point at which Michael Heseltine first inserted a wedge into Margaret Thatcher's premiership. This was the point at which, in many ways, his ultimate leadership bid was launched, because he resigned. He resigned as Secretary of State for, he was trade, wasn't he, and Britain was defence, because the cabinet went the other way. The cabinet decided to back the Sikorsky bid. This was back in the days when we had things like collective cabinet responsibility and individual ministerial responsibility, as opposed to the every man for himself bun fight that British politics has become in recent years. So Heseltine resigned after the government effectively declined to intervene to keep the company British. Now, you will now hear in the back of your brain words like globalization. You will now hear in the back of your head words like free market and interventionism versus protectionism. I know you will, because you're across these sort of issues probably better than I am. But why can't we do more to keep it British? I don't understand. 0345 606 0973. You can email james@lbc.co.uk, and you can text me on 84850. Theresa May last week said that the government should be capable of stepping in when a foreign firm swoops for British businesses that are important to workers and communities. I presume that this was more in the context of the Tata Steel plant in Port Talbot. This week, today, she appears set to green light the £24 billion swoop for arm holdings by the Japanese firm SoftBank. Some people suggest that they wouldn't be bidding now if the pound hadn't been punched so badly by Brexit. I don't know about that, and I don't want this to turn into another Brexit debate. I want to look really at the simple question of why a government can't do more to keep a business British. So, give me the fruits of your learning, give me the benefits of your expertise, but also your insights on this. I'm going to stress it for the final time. I don't think I've got even a vaguely sort of xenophobic or jingoistic bone in my body, but it seems to me that the benefit of Britain is being diminished by taking out of British ownership or British hands one of the few companies we've got that really is a world leader in 21st century technologies. It's a no-brainer, right? Why don't we do more to keep a company like this in Britain? Goodness knows, we're not exactly what you would call punching above our weight on the technological stage, but here is a British company that is. Part of the problem, of course, is shareholders. And so many of the conversations we're having at the moment seem to dilute down to shareholders. Yesterday it was the notion of people sitting at home doing nothing, but they've invested capital in a company, taking out more money from that company than the people actually working for it. I know we can run the risk of sounding a little bit Marxist when we go down this road, and you need shareholders, you need investment to get companies up and running. But something's gone toxic, hasn't it? And the same thing is happening here. Shareholders will vote for this because they will do well out of it. 3,000 employees will be unhappy. The original founder of the company will be unhappy. And I think British society should be unhappy as well. There's two things I want from you today. I would like slightly more informed support for my position, 0345 6060 973, or a polite explanation of why I really am barking up the wrong tree, why I really am living in some sort of commercial cloud cuckoo land. Borders do not exist when it comes to international trade. There is, in the strictest sense of the word, no such thing as a British company anymore, you might say. But I'm going to take a lot of convincing, because if this truly is the final British technology company that has its arms around the world, selling it to the Japanese seems to me to be akin to an act of commercial treason. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to join in. I've got Tony and John waiting. After them, it could, of course, be you. And give us the benefit of your experience. Most of us are not familiar with Arm, this technology company that we have discovered just as it's about to be sold to the Japanese is the true jewel in the crown of British technology companies. And just help me out here as a relatively naive fella looking at the world of business and wondering why the government can't act to keep it British. Just to keep it British owned. 0345 6060 973. Tony's in Salisbury. Tony, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Tony.
It's nice to speak to you, man.
Likewise.
It's always a pleasure listening.
Very kind.
No, I'm absolutely devastated by this.
Hmm.
I used to work in nanotechnology in the 80s, the only company in this country that was successful in nanotechnology. Now they've been sold to a German company.
Right.
We have just lost the plot. 30 years ago, we threw manufacturing out, and we just want the classics. Our ruling classes just seem to have this mind where the classics are the most important. We like innovation, but we hate the implementation of it. Factories, we see, dark satanic mills, you know.
You're covering a lot of ground here. A little bit of Blake at the end there. I'm impressed by your eclecticism, but can I steer you back a little bit to the nanotechnology company you worked for? Why does it matter who owns it? If it's based here and its employees are here, why does it matter who owns it? Why is it somehow bad that it's not British anymore?
Because it can disappear. We have no direct...
Oh, is he gone? That was hilarious. We could disappear, then he disappeared. Get him back up. Just make sure he's all right. 20 minutes after 10. I think, obviously, the point he was going to make is that once it is not British anymore, there's no guarantee that it has to stay in Cambridge. They are projecting more jobs, but I wonder whether, quite often when we discuss these issues, I wonder where emotion stops and intellect starts. So, is it emotional? Am I feeling emotional today that this company is not going to be British anymore? Or is there an intellectual... That's the point, isn't it? As with anything that brings in notions of nationality. John's in St Paul's in London. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, John. Hi, thanks for having me on, actually.
You've forgotten my name, haven't you?
I did, yeah.
If this was a date, this would be the worst start ever.
It should be over, but I'll make up for it.
You're not a vegetarian, are you?
No.
Oh, thank God for that. You do drink alcohol, don't you, John?
No, I don't.
Oh, God almighty, you've forgotten my name and you don't drink alcohol. This is going to be the worst date ever.
Sorry.
Call me James. Carry on.
Thanks, James. Well, on this particular matter, focusing on here,
yes,
just focusing on America. Okay, at the individual level, the founder of Facebook has retained voting control over his business.
Yes.
So has Rupert Murdoch. That's at the individual level. So within America, people are very careful not to cede control to somebody else, and their stock market, their financial system, is more than geared to allow companies to do that. We elect not to do that. That's at the individual level. Move to the government level. A few years ago, would you know why Rupert Murdoch became a US citizen?
Go on.
Did you know why he became a US citizen?
Well, business reasons.
US citizen because he was not allowed to buy Fox News.
That's it, yes.
So in their country, the government can step in and say foreign owners cannot buy.
Well, outright, it can't be the main owner, because the second biggest shareholder in News Corp for many years was a member of the Saudi Arabian royal family. So there's
5%.
It's still the second biggest shareholder.
Yeah, but it's not influential. See, once you're below control, you're not influential, are you?
No.
So what I'm trying to say to you is that they blocked when there was a purchase of the big ports. You know, the big docking stations for ships.
Yes.
P&O.
Yes.
So the Dubai Port Company tried to buy all the world's ports about 10 years ago.
I remember that.
And the deal was agreed by everyone except the US government. The US said that you can go ahead with your deal, but you can't buy our ports. They're of strategic importance to us. We cannot let our ports, i.e. shipping ports, get into the hands of foreign ownership. Now move to energy. Our energy is controlled by France.
It is, yes.
Maggie Thatcher had the golden share, which our great friend Gordon Brown and Tony Blair just gave away. Although she fought very hard for this thing called the golden share, which was we called it a golden share. It just meant that the government would have the right to stop a foreign purchaser buying assets that we deemed were important in the national interest. So
and I can see that with docks and the national interest with docks. I mean, I guess that's probably the argument partly that Michael Heseltine made with regard to military helicopters and Westland and Sikorsky. And I guess technology, actually, you wouldn't have to work that hard to argue that creating microchips in the modern world is in the national interest. You want to have control over your own supply. But what I'm going to do this hour, and it's not taken long to crystallize, is try to map where emotional responses end and intellectual responses begin. Because it is, it's like some people are teasing me for suddenly having discovered Little Englander credentials when I've spent most of my career fighting against them. But I don't care what nationality these 3,000 workers are or where they came from. I just want the best 3,000 people available in the whole world to have the job. So there's no stepping back from my position on people. Businesses are not people. Why does it matter that this company won't be British anymore? Why? Because at the moment it just feels wrong. I can't articulate anything more intellectual than that.
Well, I think that if you look at the concept of human happiness, I mean, we can't just export our goodness in the form of all the jobs going abroad and then expect governments. We're here to ultimately.
But what makes you think the jobs will go abroad any more than if it was still under British? Didn't Dyson move all his production abroad, and that still gets held up as a great example of a British company?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. I would agree with that. I would agree that if you're saying there's a foreign ownership, is that the trigger point for a mass exodus of jobs? No, but I think it definitely could help. It would definitely add to it, wouldn't it? Because you've lost control. And take Autonomy. Autonomy was a software company bought by Hewlett Packard.
Yes.
That's been slightly dismembered since it's been purchased by HP. I mean, the investment cycle changes.
Cadbury's as well is an example of something that feels wrong that it's not British.
James,
but
can I ask you
anything? Well, not anything.
Don't you feel? You know the emotional point.
Remember, it's just a first date, John. Remember.
I know that, but you know your one about, aren't we debating, or isn't there lots of papers now being written that we could have power shortages within 10 years?
I'll take your word for it.
There's lots of papers being written that the rate that we're consuming electricity and the growth of our population and the decommissioning of some of our, combined with the decommissioning of some of our power plants.
Okay, yes.
Means that power shortages is a real possibility within 10 years. Now, that's not an emotional argument.
No.
And
that makes it problematical that our power supply is in foreign hands because they're not going to prioritise us if it comes down to a choice. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, okay, back to the point about jobs.
Yeah.
Because we've outsourced all of this into France, etc., we now are in a position, they're saying, that we don't even have the skilled engineers and labour within the UK to build the power plants that we need to avoid the power shortages in 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Someone decided 10 years ago that it was a good idea to sell these assets to EDF and blah, blah, blah. Here we are now, looking forward 10 years ahead and saying, we totally are at the mercy of Chinese and French engineers.
See, that's terrifying.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
That's terrifying when you put it like that.
That's terrifying me.
And we've wasted all this time. We've wasted all this time and energy.
And I don't get sentimental about the word Great Britain. I mean, by the way, I'm a second-generation immigrant, but sure. I think that is great if we protect our national interest.
Yes, I do as well. Protecting the national interest is actually something. I mean, this is under threat now. Our national interest is being compromised by this, and yet all the people who've been bleating patriotism for the last couple of years are running for the hills. It's quite bizarre. It's quite bizarre when you put it like that, especially when you sort of see that the right wing generally goes down that patriotic, in quotes, path, and actually where it leads is to us having our energy pretty much stitched up by the French and the Chinese, and now the Japanese buying the best technology firm in the country. But I'm open to, well, not just open to contradiction on this. I actually want to be wrong. I want John to be wrong. Ron's in St Albans. Ron, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just echo what your last contributor said. I mean, I'm also a second, third generation immigrant in this country, so no beating of chest. But ARM, that's our Intel.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
And we talk about wanting to have a seat at all the big tables. We've just given away one of our seats. I mean, ARM is in everything and will be in everything. I'm in the industry, trust me, they're absolutely brilliant.
Well, that line about them selling more microchips in a year than Intel has sold in its entire existence. So now that's right.
And the business model was very, very clever, because what they do is they license their IP and they let other people take the burden of the manufacturing. Brilliant. But now we're going to give that away. And to the point of what we'll lose, right? I mean, the industry, the semiconductor industry in the last 10 years has gone through so much consolidation.
I'm going to run out of time, and I apologise for coming to you a little late. Tell me why it matters who owns it.
It matters because what will happen is, this is all about money. You accept that. It's about monetizing it and making more money out of it. They will walk in.
Yes, it has to be.
They will start de-skilling all the jobs that are in Cambridge, and those they can outsource to cheaper regions, they will do.
Well, they insist they won't. They say they're going to hire more and more people in Cambridge, but of course we probably haven't got the people needed to do that, so we'd have to ship them in from elsewhere anyway. It's 29 minutes after 10. God, I've said it before and I will say it again, and you can sue me if you don't like it. I have the finest callers, I think I've got the finest callers now on this programme in the history of talk radio. I truly do. The expertise, the confidence I have when I come on air not knowing a great deal about a subject that you will clue us all in is absolutely epic. I'm so proud and so grateful to you. Don't let me down after the news with Lisa Aziz. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Derek's in Hampton. He writes, ARM are not an Intel as such. They don't manufacture anything, James. They design and license chips. They own the intellectual property. They are thus the architects of our technical future. For example, the Internet of Things will now be owned by the Japanese, and the Japanese will dictate and license that technological future. That's kind of scary. But it goes on. This is from Jason, who writes, I'm an integrated circuit designer, and the consensus at the office this morning is that the ARM sale is bad news. Don't worry, Nigel Farage has gone on Twitter to say that it's great news. So everybody who actually knows what they're talking about can relax. Uncle Nige says it's all great. The technology and decision-making will now go to Japan. They will strip the company of its technological assets. The 1,500 jobs promised will probably be focused in the most part on sales. Good luck finding 1,500 integrated circuit design engineers. So we're not creating high-technology jobs. It's cheap, not just because the value of the pound has plummeted, not just because of the value of the pound, but also because we value websites way over the value of the technology that we use to view them. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Number 4, now profits will not be a British company profit, so that will have a long-term impact. And finally, companies like this feed and spin off other high-tech companies and also provide very, very high technology training for staff. If the high-tech aspect is removed from the UK office, this can limit the spin-offs likely and limit our future capability in this area due to lack of highly skilled people moving on from ARM to other companies. It's a pioneering flagship high-tech company, James, that we should be proud of and protect for British ownership for the good of the economy. But how do you do that? And now you've got your intellectual arguments as to why this is potentially disastrous news. What can the government do? They'd have to change the law, I think, to stop the sale, if the shareholders have approved it. But that's what Prime Ministers are supposed to do. And only last week she was stating quite categorically and publicly that a policy of opposing foreign takeovers of British businesses was at the heart of her personal vision. This is quite remarkable. 0345 6060 973. Naresh is in Guildford. Naresh, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Good to speak to you. In my opinion, I think we should stop takeovers like this, because this is more driven by the shareholders and the profit they make. And the assurance they're giving is 3,000 jobs staying and other 3,000 jobs created. But we shouldn't be looking at it as just saving jobs. It's more than that. Lots of countries like Middle East and China are investing in sovereign funds, which is basically to get control of such companies all around the world. They're building power, and they're getting a lot more than just money out of this. So I think it's more political, a statement of control being held in Japan rather than in Britain. So there's a lot more to it. I'll just give you another comparison.
Yeah, if you would.
If we have, if a British company tries and goes into India to do business, there is a requirement that the company has a 50% partner, a local company, so that a foreign company can come and do business there.
Where's that? Sorry, where is that, Naresh?
In India.
In India, okay. Seems reasonable. So you keep the control at home.
Yeah, you keep control at home. Now the corporate companies are trying to push through and make changes in the Indian system so that they can get better control, but that still hasn't happened. And if you look at the 2008 recession, when the whole world was going through a big financial crisis, India somehow managed to minimize that because they were looking at catering to the local service and keeping 50% control of the company so that your external market forces don't drive the price down of shares.
But I hear you, and I understand most of what you're saying. I'm not going to pretend I'm as clever as you are about these issues. But if it's so clearly wrong, how come we're doing it?
Because we are more driven by, we have given most of the control to the shareholders, and shareholders are doing on the basis of what profit they can make financially. And we don't have a say in these corporate companies as a country or as governments. That's the problem. You have to create policies which will control that, which is what Theresa May was actually speaking in her first
yes, that's right.
First speech. And now she's accepting this takeover. So I really don't understand whether she wants to actually do it or not. I thought that's what she's going to do, so that the money that is generated from the employees, which then goes into company finances and then get distributed into shareholders, is controlled, and more of that money can be distributed to the actual people working in bonuses or whatever. That's what should be happening. We're more giving more power to the shareholders who take all that money. So this is the issue we are discussing for a couple of weeks now, and that's exactly what's happening here.
And you would think it's exactly the same as what happened at Cadbury's and when AstraZeneca was almost sold to Pfizer, which Theresa May mentioned last week, because as we saw when Cadbury's, that great Birmingham company, was bought by Kraft, or when AstraZeneca was almost sold to Pfizer, transient shareholders, who are mostly companies investing other people's money, are not the only people with an interest when firms are sold or close. That was last week. And then yesterday, this is good news for British workers, good news for the British economy. It shows, as the Prime Minister has been saying, this is Philip Hammond talking, that we can make a success of leaving the EU. This is strange. It's just strange. That was an official spokeswoman for the Prime Minister, I beg your pardon, not Philip Hammond. 10:40 is the time. 03456060973 is the number you need. Let's mix it up a little bit. A consensus can be a little bit stifling sometimes, and we're not all experts. There must be informed expert opinion that sees benefits in this, and maybe I am indulging in something that I normally criticise others for, which is a sort of sentimentalising of Britishness. It's easier to pin down what I mean by Britishness than it is when you're talking about actual people. What I mean is that the company is owned here and the money effectively stays here and the benefit is effectively accrued here. But does that necessarily stop if the strings are being pulled from Tokyo? 10:40 is the time. Anthony is in Watford. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Look, you're too young to remember the British motor industry.
Well, that's not strictly true, actually.
All right. British Leyland...
My father was the industrial correspondent for the Daily Telegraph in Birmingham from 1974 onwards, which is precisely the period of decline that you're about to refer to, which is fine, but don't patronise me.
I'm not. I thought you were younger, sorry. What I'm getting at is that during that period, it was a disaster for the British motor industry. It totally owned and controlled here. The Japanese...
Owned by government, not owned by the private sector.
Well, originally they were private, but you're right, it got nationalised, I think.
No one's calling for it to be nationalised.
No, but what I'm getting at, it was entirely British controlled and owned. All the directors were British and so on. When the Japanese came in with Honda, Nissan and so on, they have actually exported more cars from Britain than British Leyland did at its height. So I think just to say Japanese ownership might not be good is a bit unfair.
If you're comparing the finest technology company in the world to the worst car manufacturers in the world, I don't really see how that's relevant.
Well, what I'm saying is control outside isn't necessarily in itself a bad thing.
Well, no, if you're taking over one of the worst performing industries in the world, then your point is very powerful. But if you're taking over one of the best performing companies in the world, your point is somewhat diluted, Anthony.
Well, the investment that's needed to make ARM...
Where do all the profits from Nissan go?
The profits?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of them are invested in plants here. The remaining...
Well, they're not. No. The profits at the end of the investment. By profits, I mean the money that's left over at the end of doing business.
It goes to shareholders, wherever they are.
And where are most of Nissan's shareholders?
I assume in Japan, but I don't know. I'd have to look at the share register.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, but the profits residual profits are needed, whatever it is, the profits go to shareholders. I don't know who the shareholders of ARM Holdings are. I suspect a lot of them are foreign.
And this is what Theresa May said last week, is that there should be interests other than just the shareholders. This decision appears to suggest that she doesn't really mean that, doesn't it?
No, I think what she looked at is strategic industries, and she's taken a view, whether rightly or wrongly, that this doesn't fit into that category.
What does strategic mean?
Well, exactly.
Hang on, you just used it. You need to tell me what it means.
Okay, there are different definitions of strategic. Some people would see almost anything that's British, like Cadbury Schweppes, as being strategic, and there was a lot of objection when Kraft took them over, and a lot of things.
These chips are in every computer in the world. They're in most technology. They're going to be on dashboards of fighter jets. They're going to be. How can that not be strategic?
Well, let me finish. I believe that the problem is that if you start doing this, the French, the Germans are already very protective of their industries, not just strategic ones. And if you go down the route that you don't allow any foreign takeovers of what you consider a strategic,
yes,
you've got a problem. And my view is that
I hope you're right.
strategic, I agree with you, by the way, on nuclear. I think to have the Chinese owning nuclear facilities here is very dangerous. To me, that is a strategic issue, and I agree on ports. I think allowing control of ports to be foreign-owned is different to ARM Holdings, which is our Intel, isn't it, basically?
Sort of, yes. And yet you haven't... You haven't addressed my conniptions. Maybe my conniptions are a little shallow. I just have a sense, almost an emotional sense, that it won't be a British business anymore, and that just feels like bad news, Anthony.
All right. Well, that's a subjective view.
Yes, it is. It is.
Well, I admire you for subjective views, because that's what most people make their decisions on. But at the end of the day, there are pros and cons with this one, and I don't think you can come down hard on one side or the other with ARM.
That seems reasonable. Have you been given pause by the fact that we've heard from, I don't know what your background is, but we've heard from an awful lot of people who are neck deep in this particular sector, and they're profoundly troubled by it, not to mention the fellow who set the company up in the first place, who describes it as the last British technology company that has a global reach. So that's it, we're out of the global reach business.
But you made the point that Dyson is regarded by some as being a hero. But he moved an awful lot of his company. His technology was far ahead of the Germans even. But, you know, there are no simple answers to these questions. And if they put the investment in, I think the company may do better.
Well, I don't, and no one's going to hope that you're wrong, but of course, even if it does do better, it will be the shareholders profiting. That's just a modern truism, isn't it? It's not even open to debate. Although these countries that we've heard of, America, India, they seem to have positions in place that limit the amount of foreign ownership. And yeah, I mean, Anthony's very powerful contribution notwithstanding, I quite like that idea. I believe in a global marketplace. I happen to believe in free trade and free movement of people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you should be offering everything up to the highest bidder. There should be other, as Theresa May said, other considerations taken into account, like community, country, economy. 10:46. Do you remember that thing I was saying 20 minutes ago about having by far the best listeners in the business? Someone's just sent me a list of the Nissan stockholders during the conversation we were having a minute ago. And it is not mostly Japanese owned. The biggest shareholder is actually Renault. But if I read you a list like this of who the principal shareholders are in Nissan: Renault, Japan Trustees Services Bank, the Chase Manhattan Bank, the Master Trust Bank of Japan, State Street Bank and Trust Company, Japan Trustees Services Bank, Nippon Life Insurance, JP Morgan Chase Bank, bank. Does it really matter that a Japanese bank is buying our technology company? Our technology company, I've never heard of it before. Someone's explained to me they were in the ground floor of the foundation of Acorn Computers, which put it in context. But we'll continue that conversation in a moment. Tom Sawrich just joined me with a remarkable breaking story from Lincolnshire.
We got an update at about 9 o'clock this morning. James came aware of a police incident taking place in Spalding at the Castle Sports Complex swimming pool after reports of a gunshot being fired. We've just had word from Lincolnshire Police, who have just told us in the last 2 minutes or so that 3 people, including a suspected gunman, have been shot dead in a firearms incident near that swimming pool. The police are saying that it is not a terrorist incident, that they were called again, as we said, around 9 o'clock this morning, and a large cordon is now in place. But 3 people have been shot dead, including a suspected gunman, in an exchange of firearms incidents in Spalding in Lincolnshire.
Good grief. And that's all we know.
All we know is that the police are saying it's not a terrorist incident.
And the situation has now been contained.
Presumably, yes, you'd have thought, with those people killed, but why, who and how, we still yet to find out.
Tom Sawrich, many thanks indeed. 10:51 is the time. In the next hour, we turn our attention to the... And I know what you're thinking. You reach for the world's smallest violins here. The living standards of the middle classes are now closer to the poor than to the rich. There are many issues tied up in this that I think we're going to want to talk about. Coming up after 12, we're back in reality now, in the context of domestic political news. We're back in reality. I said to you yesterday that we hadn't done a normal show since June the 22nd. It's now practically July the 22nd, and yesterday was the first time since the day before the referendum that we did a normal show. 3 topics together, 3 different conversations, trying to bleed one into another. Normal, new at 10 o'clock, what we'd be doing at 11 o'clock, new at 11 o'clock, what we'd be doing at 12 o'clock. And today's back like that again. For now, it would seem. But I certainly won't be placing any money on it staying this way forever, not after the weeks that we have had. 10:52 is the time. Coming up after 12, we're looking at the vexed issue of telling off other people's children as opposed to telling off your own, which most of us these days are pretty rubbish at anyway. But before that, back to the notion of a sell-off and the suggestion from the last caller, I think quite compelling suggestion that it's not necessarily that bad. And when you read the list of companies that own Nissan, they're making cars in the north of England on an unprecedented scale. Almost all the money left over after reinvestment and overheads will be going to institutional shareholders, Renault being the most being the biggest one, and then mostly Japanese banks after that. So will it really be bad for Britain to see our best performing technology company bought by a Japanese bank? You got something that's facts rather than feelings. Daniel is in Slough. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there, James. Thanks for having me. It's an interesting discussion going on this morning, and what with everything going on at the moment, the figures being bandied about, to replace Trident, it's going to be in between 35 and 100 million, 100 billion rather, whoever you're believing. And this, to me, is an investment. I mean, we're talking about an investment for example, if the government were to push forward British Telecom or help someone to take over this company. I only say British Telecom because I think Smart Bank is Japan Telecom, so it's sort of like a government type initiative really that's been built up over the years and conglomerated over a few sectors. So originally looking at...
it's not an either or, is it? I mean, you can't say we shouldn't... If we're spending that much money on a nuclear deterrent, we should be able to buy a software company or run a site. I mean, no one's calling for it to be nationalised. Or am I, actually, without realising it?
Well, I think essentially you are, to some extent, because what we were talking about earlier is we're a service nation.
Yes.
And if we're outsourcing our services to other people, what's the sense in that? Why don't we own the services and build those services ourselves? So we own and serve. This is precisely, I think, where we're going wrong. We don't have anything tangible, like you're saying. It's all services.
Well, so is this actually, because I mean, it's not the actual microchip. There's not a production line here. It's the licensing of the design. So that's a service as well, isn't it, rather than a product?
Absolutely, but it's a service for something that's so popular with the uprising of mobile phones. It's integrated into everything. So it's actually holding that license is huge.
And we won't hold it anymore.
Exactly. So,
and by we, what do we mean by we, Daniel?
Well, at the moment, it's held by a private company. But what I'm saying is, if our government and now with this new sort of platform of government, we should be sort of, the nation should be thinking of actually, maybe we should invest in this. Maybe we, as a nation, should put some money into this, like we did with the banks, like we did with the bank bailouts.
Yeah. I agree with you. I agree with. Does that make me? What does that make us? What are we now? I'm not sure. In the modern crazy, in the modern language of politics, you're either a communist or a fascist, whatever the subject is.
Yeah, or a bit of both, I think, and probably a racist to boot.
Yeah, a little bit of racism, little Englander. The point about that, and it is about national ownership, government ownership, and somehow post Thatcher, that everybody gets their knickers in a twist about that. Except that we have energy companies now that are owned by the government. It's just the French government, not the British one.
Yeah, exactly. It just makes no sense, It's like we're giving everything away, and all we're doing is surfing this ride of
short-term profit.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy, and in the long term, for my kids, I'm worried. I'm really worried about the state of England and what it will be like.
I know what you mean, because you wonder what will be what in terms of British business. I don't know that that's necessarily an unfashionable thing to want to support, given that we're seeing evidence of Japanese business, American business, Indian business, French business enjoying some form of state protection. Just to clarify, SoftBank is the name of the buyer. It's not actually a bank. I misspoke on that. Thanks to Philippe for pointing it out. It's a telecom and technology company. Obviously it is. Yes, of course it is.
And it's like a Japanese telecom. So it's essentially like British telecom, but they're lucrative and well done because they're Japanese
and they're going to own they're going to own probably the best British technology company.
Absolutely. And firstly, this is risk technology, so it's reduced instruction set processing, which is now becoming, as we all know, technology moves on very fast. Intel have produced a low power full instruction set chip, which is possibly going into mobile phones. So in essence, it could be a dying fad, and that's looking at the other side of it. But,
of course. You speculate to accumulate. It doesn't always work out that way. So every single person who really understands the sector, and I think I can put you on that list, can I, Daniel?
Somewhat, yeah.
They think this is really, really bad news.
Yeah, I think so. I think, we should be embracing this. And just one other point, high speed 2 or whatever it is, 34 billion to get you 15 minutes quicker to
well, everyone's got a favourite. Everyone's got a favourite. Trident yesterday, HS2 today. Why are we spending the money on that? It's like my little girl who asked if she can spend her birthday money twice. I know exactly what you mean, though. It seems an odd priority, perhaps, for a government. Thank you, Daniel. Last word on this to Ian, who appropriately enough is in the city. Ian, what would you like to say?
Well, I was a shareholder of ARM. I just closed all my positions this morning. I just sold all my shares in ARM.
45% up on last week.
Well, I did very well. On one tranche, I've been a shareholder for some time. I made like 600%, and on another tranche about 200+%.
Wow!
But yeah, so I've been a believer in ARM Holdings for a long time. But the reason that I sold out this morning was one to do with corporate culture.
Go on.
The Japanese corporate culture is very centralised, very hierarchical, and I don't think that sits very well with a country, with a company that is an innovative company. I think they strangle it and kill it, personally.
So you've cashed in because you think it's a bad deal for ARM?
I think I look at it from my perspective.
Of course.
I don't see the growth in it in the future. I think that they will try and centralise and take the technology to Japan. I think the innovation will die.
And that's bad for Britain.
That company. It's bad. Yeah, it's bad for Britain. But I've got to say, I've worked in a number of countries around the world, including some real high tech countries. And Britain is now a tier 2 country. It's not a tier 1 country in technological innovation.
But this is a tier 1 company.
It is a tier
so to speak.
It is a tier 1 company. But if you look at innovation, you've got Dyson and you've got ARM Holdings as like 2 of the most innovative companies in the technology.
We're going to run out of time.
Yeah, and now we've got one.
Now we've got one, and then there was one. Oh, happy days.